So just a note to everybody else too, if you don't want to be, if you don't want your, I don't think your faces will appear if you're not speaking. So we wanted to talk about Bill C-12, which is called the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act. My name is Adrian Kiva. I am a member of the La Peche Coalition for a Green New Deal. I'm our spokesperson for today's event. Although we're meeting virtually, we're meeting on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. This year, land defenders from Kitigan-Zibi and Barrier Lake and beyond organized moose moratorium blockade, and also demonstrated in Ottawa, demanding a freeze for the OPS budget and an end to systemic racism. And that event was organized alongside the Ottawa Black Diaspora Coalition and the Justice for Abdirahman Coalition. So we consider these acknowledgements, we as a group consider these acknowledgements especially important, not just because this is the land that we're meeting on and the land that's affected by the political decisions that we make in these spaces, but also because as a climate justice organization, we understand that Indigenous communities, Indigenous organizers are so often on the front lines of stopping fossil fuel projects from going into the ground. And Indigenous nations, the territories that they occupy, are actually stewards of over 80% of the world's biodiversity. And they hold the knowledge systems necessary for healthy relations among all life. So obviously there's been some confusion around this, but we were intending this meeting to be a public relation with our member of parliament. Only our section, our presentation will be shared if you're watching this recording, because there was a misunderstanding with our MP that we will rectify hopefully in future meetings. And as has been noted, we've met multiple times with our MP since presenting the IPCC report to him in 2019. We've met both around general climate accountability conversations and around specific issues, and have been encouraged in the past when he spoke out in opposition to the Tech 9 mine after both our protests and meeting with him on this subject. And we have been discouraged also in the past by his silence in response to, for example, protests against the Trans Mountain Pipeline, LNG Canada, and Coastal GasLink Pipeline. So we understand the need for continued pressures. And every time that we meet, the emergency that we're trying to address and that we are living through becomes more urgent. The most recent IPCC report states that we must limit warming of the planet to 1.5 degrees Celsius. This means globally reducing our carbon emissions by 50% by 2030 and achieving net zero by 2050. Climate justice also dictates that wealthy nations like Canada, who have most benefited from the fossil fuel industry, also lead the way in decarbonization. So for this next decade, right, from here to 2030, we're in a critical position. Last decade, the climate justice movement got its legs and got people out on the street, shifted the narrative both in the media and in the houses of power. This decade must be about legislating the necessary change. We've already passed 1.1 degrees Celsius globally, and we're on track to overshoot 1.5 by possibly several degrees. This would be the end of any recognizable form of civilization as we know it. That's not hyperbole, that's in the IPCC report. And as Ilse pointed out in relation to the feedback loops, the more data that we acquire, the more dire these predictions have tended to become. Fortunately, our government recognizes this, and net zero is an agreed upon target, both in the House and in the Senate by 2050. However, we know that words without actions are empty. And in the past 6 years of liberal governance, we have seen an incredibly consistent line of saying the right thing without taking the necessary action to address the crisis. So for those who don't know, the bill that we're here to discuss today is not the first bill to propose emission targets for the country. The federal government has passed or has set at least 9 emission targets since 1992. All have been inadequate in relation to the scientific consensus at the time and none have ever been met. So climate accountability such as this one is very welcome because we clearly need accountability to counter inaction. And before we speak about the bill, we just wanted to address a recurring comment from our MP about accountability. So every time that we've met with Mr. Amos, he has justified the limited climate action that we've seen on the basis that although climate is a priority for him personally, it is not a priority with many members of his constituency, that he has many other files, and that climate issues represent only a small minority of his inbox on a given week. We agree absolutely that public support should be important to federal decision-making. So we wanted to take a moment to address this important point because it's also the opinion of our group that our government regularly makes important decisions that run against public support and are made without any accountability to the electorate. So an example, this fall of 2020, the government opposed a wealth tax, a conservative 1% wealth tax put forward by the NDP, which was supported by a supermajority of Canadians. 79%, not just NDP voters, but across the electorate when polled were in favor of this tax. Further example, in 2018, of course, the government, sight unseen, bought the Kinder Morgan pipeline for $4.5 billion without any public consultation and was roundly decried by all other parties. And so we see a lack of accountability to the electorate. And as a group, we're not only concerned with the lack of accountability to our electorate, to the public, but also a lack of accountability to other nations. Last winter, we saw the violent removal by the RCMP of Wet'suwet'en land defenders on their territory, right, which was a clear violation of Indigenous sovereignty. And additionally, there aren't just nations on Turtle Island, but nations elsewhere. Our government, along with other big polluters like Australia and the US, sabotage the UN climate talks and block accountability at every opportunity. At the most recent talks, this was in Madrid in 2019, a representative from the island nation of Tuvalu, which is pictured there, citizens of whom are pictured there, which is already going underwater because of climate change, said that our country is committing, quote, crimes against humanity. So we bring forward these few examples because we think it's representative of an issue that we've been seeing over the past 6 years, which is that public accountability and public opinion is not the only driving force in decision-making in the government, and possibly not even the main decision driving force. And there are lots of other examples. And we chose these ones because they were, clear, dramatic examples. And we are very much for public accountability. And that's a second point in relation to the comment is we don't think that a minority of citizens are concerned about climate action. We understand that this government was elected on climate action, that in the last federal election, 70% of Canadians voted for parties who promised more climate action, and that we are in an election year, and unlikely in this upcoming election, the government will again run on a platform of climate action. So for this reason, an accountability bill is very welcome. The stated purpose of this bill is to legislate targets, to create independent oversight, and create accountability checkpoints. So it was presented in November. It's moving through the House on its second reading. There are issues that have been brought up with this bill by many federal climate advocacy groups. So we're just going to outline some of those. The first checkpoint for this bill, it puts in 5-year rolling checkpoints up until 2050. The first checkpoint is in 2030, which means that there are no progress reports required until 2028. And yet 2030 is the year that the IPCC calls for achieving a 50% reduction of 2005 emission levels. So a deadline cannot be a checkpoint, especially in this critical decade. There's no clear enforcement mechanism and therefore no binding commitment. The advisory board is not created as a separate committee. It's not an independent body to the government. So, and anyone can be appointed onto it, including oil industry lobbyists. The minister is not required to consider expert advice when setting emission reductions targets, increasing the risk that political pressure could lead to weaker targets because the minister can also change targets at their discretion. The bill doesn't include a clear commitment to constitutional indigenous rights or the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, UNDRIP. There's also no mention of accountability to fossil fuel workers in job creation, transition, retraining, or as a bridge to retirement. So to the groups whose analysis kind of highlights these issues with the bill, and to us, it reads to us as an accountability act with the accountability removed. Those are just a few of the criticisms from climate analysis groups. And we're happy to share sources if people want further criticisms. So this leads us to our demands for accountability. Knowing that the government has never met an emissions target and that the accountability mechanisms of the new bill are vague and insufficient, here are 5 demands to increase the accountability of Bill C-12. That Bill C-12 explicitly comply with UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous People. That the bill have an accountability before 2030, so by 2025 at the latest. And that there be independent experts on the advisory body of the bill. That it include planning for fossil fuel workers' transitions, and that no representatives of the fossil fuel industry sit on the advisory board. These demands alone are not enough. Bill C-12 alone is not enough, but we see it as a first step that the government can take towards climate accountability. And so we put to you, Mr. Amos, these demands and ask that you take the necessary action for this emergency and publicly present them to the question period. So at this point now, I'm going to give our Member of Parliament a chance to respond to what we've brought forward. We will also be ending the recording because of the